I want to welcome Agile XRM to the podcast. I've known the people at Agile XRM for the past 12 years. I've seen how their business process management tool can add massive value to complex organizational processes in sectors such as finance and government. If you have complex processes or a need for dialogues on the Power Platform or Dynamics 365, take a look at how this BPM tool can add value. You can find them at agilexrm.com or check out the show notes for more details. Welcome to the Power Platform Show. Thanks for joining me today. I hope today's guest inspires and educates you on the possibilities of the Microsoft Power Platform. Now, let's get on with the show. Okay, welcome back to the show. As you can see, we've got a guest on the show again today. I was reading this week and this quote jumped out of the book, and the book I'm reading is on how to be a good product manager. And it's authored by a chap, I forget his name, but he specializes for the last 30 odd years of his career. A lot of the products that we have in the software space, he's worked for the big companies and led the product development. And he said something that resonated with me, which is fall in love with the problem, not the solution. And across my career in the Microsoft business ecosystem, I have often seen so many times we've jumped to a solution, and many times we haven't become clear on what the problem is. And, you know, the Toyota Way came out with what they call the 5 whys, which is really to drill into and understand why is the problem we're trying to address really the problem. And I just to add to this, to show how crazy it is when you don't do it. I was reading recently about a jet in the US Air Force that crashed with loss of life of the pilot. And they carried out an investigation into it. And the official report from the military is that the loss was because of pilot error. Case closed. And the author of the book was called in months later to investigate, as in from a, you know, did we really understand what the problem was, that it was pilot error? The reason the aircraft crashed into the ground is that the pilot was unconscious at the time and couldn't pull the aircraft out of a dive. So therefore, how can we say it was pilot error when he was unconscious? And so they said, so why was he unconscious? Well, in this aircraft, at a certain point, there is a lack of oxygen in the cockpit. Okay, why is there a lack of oxygen in the cockpit? And, well, it was manufactured. There's a default in the manufacturing of this aircraft that caused this to happen in scenarios which were part of the operating envelope of how this aircraft should operate. And so the whole thing it wasn't pilot error. It was actually manufacturing error of an aircraft that had not. But as far as the case was closed, it was just pilot error. And he went on to say, you know, there's so many things that we say a human error in what is produced that is actually never really human error. It was actually product design error of whoever created the original. And I just love this concept of the 5 whys and uncovering, and falling in love with the problem forces you to go, are we actually solving the right problem? And so why I bring that up is that I feel that in talking to the C-suite, sometimes, and I feel where we are in AI right now, there's a jump on the bandwagon of we need to do this because everybody's doing it. And nobody's really said, hang on a second, what is the problem we're trying to solve inside the organization? So with that, Andrew, I'll throw across to you. Take us on our fearless journey on this podcast.
So we have the soliloquy from Mark, and then it gets passed over to me. Great. Yeah. So I think that this is interesting to me because, Mark, when you were talking about falling in love with the solution, I thought back to all of the times going back to, you know, when I would design a web page, right? So I'm going back to circa 2001 here, right? Or I would build an app, or I would, you know, do a whatever. And I would it was new, and I could look at it and I would think, wow, that's really cool. I did something new, right? So I think it's easy for us psychologically to fall in love with solutions and want to run away from problems. But I don't think actually, and I've not read this book, I don't think that's necessarily what the book that you're talking about is suggesting, right? It's not fall in love with the existence of the problem. It's fall in love with kind of the mental exercise of trying to unwind the problem.
Correct.
It's not the end product. It is the unwinding of the problem. Yeah.
100%.
But it's not, I don't know how you know, how you guys were taught, because I'm not close enough to like Western schooling to know, but I'll tell you this, in Romania, you get a set of questions and you need to find the answer and you write down the answer. It's easy to not fall in love with the problem, because being able to tame the solution, mold it into what you need it to be, and coming up with the correct answer is so seductive and so powerful that us as adults now, you know, within the business world, it's easy to go back to that instinct and almost show power by being able to untangle the intricacies of the solution and say, I do AI.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter that you need it or not and what's your problem, but I've got a solution and I know how to use it.
So I just when Anna mentioned schooling, I thought of being in my 9th grade geometry class and having to go through the active. Do you remember geometry proofs, where it wasn't so much that you got the right answer at the end, it's that you had to demonstrate to the teacher how you arrived at the answer, right? So very quickly in my mind, I start to apply this to some of the work that I've been doing with executive leaders on building. We're not to the executing yet. I think that's actually right now what Mark is trying to keep us away from, is the executing. But how do you actually build that strategy? So I pulled up just in front of me a slide that I have to hand, which none of these come from any single one organization, right? But these are this is a sampling of some of the guiding principles that various of the execs that I work with have come up with through the courses of our conversation. So here's a few of them. We are Microsoft Cloud Platform first, building value by avoiding one-off point solutions. Power Platform is a key driver and enabler of our innovation initiatives. Return on investment is made by leveraging the Microsoft Cloud to its fullest extent. Risk is reduced as Shadow IT moves onto a governed platform, and Power Platform empowers our colleagues and operating groups. So there were a couple Power Platform references in there, but that was just because, you know, the client that I was working with. So in my mind, I'm starting to pull out here. Okay, so one problem that I think is really common in our world is that there's at least a sense that organizations are exposed to insane levels of risk by a lack of security or governance or order, usually in their data platform, right? So that's the risk is reduced. Or as I said in a previous episode, the legal client I had that said, we want to keep our partners out of jail, right? You know, there's another one here about avoiding one-off point solutions. So a problem there, right, is that we're probably making a lot of investment. We're over investing because we're not solving these problems as an ecosystem or as a network of issues. We're trying to solve them as one-offs. I feel like I've done a lot of talking, so I'll kick it over to someone else. But yeah, this is an interesting sort of thought experiment. Like, what's even upstream of your principles? Your principles are driven by your challenges or maybe the opportunities that you see. Yeah.
I'll jump in to offer my 2 cents. Thanks, Mark, for having me back on. You ask about the question about products and, product ownership and building a product. I think we unfortunately have a lot of different types of people involved in building a product, and it kind of depends on, your perspective. For example, we are diligently trying to increase our library of past performances, and if you ask one person on the team to write up a past for performance, and let's say they're a technologist or an engineer, their past performance will be on, this amazing microservices based architecture that was scalable, and it used all these different services, and we brought it together and it was amazing. And then somebody else might talk about the user experience or talk about how good it looked and so forth. And somebody on my team recently said to me, you know, early on in developing or working on a proposal with a client, we need to be able to think about what would the press release be when this thing is completed, and what would that press release be highlighting as that amazing, you know, thing that was published. And I thought it was a good way of framing it, that we often dive straight into, we work with a client, they say they've got a problem or they've got an outcome they want to achieve, and we dive into the solutioning part of it to figure out how we get to that outcome. And this idea of the press release or the celebration at the end of the thing and what should be highlighted was an important way, I think, for me to think about framing that.
Yeah.
I love the way you started with, like, unfortunately, there are many people involved in projects.
Right. Unfortunately, I just didn't do it all myself.
Of course, you need different expertise and different skill sets and that kind of, you know, combination of all those skills to produce the outcome. But it's interesting, right, to see the different perspectives that people will have on what that outcome was that they delivered.
It's interesting. You use the word outcome there. And I feel that so much of what we do in business is around output.
Output, for sure.
Rather than outcomes.
Yeah.
Right? And it's,
yes.
You know, when you talked about that scenario then of, you know, look at this amazing microservice or whatever, you know, that we've created and we've done something. And I even feel that this is a problem in businesses general, where always you've got to be doing something. You're showing output. We're showing lots and lots of output. But at the end of the day, is it moving the needle? Is it an outcome that's, you know, transformative? Or is it being, you know, you've got to clock your 82% of hours for the week, that type of thing? Yeah.
But we've built 75 apps. What are you on about?
Yeah.
In everyday scenarios now, I think, you know, because of COVID, we fell into a world of meetings, scheduling meetings for everything. We back up our calendars with meetings, and we have task lists. And just last week, I had to send out a message to my entire business unit to start to reframe kind of the way that we work, or at least an attempt. Everybody wants to complete the tasks, and we rush in and we don't take a step back to think about, well, what are the important outcomes I need to achieve? We're just trying to check the list off as quickly as possible. And I find myself kind of falling into that trap often. And I have to remind myself constantly that think about the outcomes, so that helps me prioritize what I'm trying to achieve rather than just rushing through, you know, a checklist exercise. But I feel like across our entire organization and across many organizations, I think we've all fallen into that habit of check off the list as quickly as possible.
Yeah. For the last 15 years, I've worked on a model of GTD, right? Getting things done. It came out I forget when it came out. And so zero inbox became part of my lifestyle and life cycle for 15 years. And it was only at the start of this year that I've been challenging this whole thinking. Am I doing it just to check a checklist off and therefore get the, you know, the dopamine hit from that? And I've now gone to, I only go for zero inbox once a week. And I've only look at my email twice a day. And I only go on social media once a day for a set amount of time. I removed all the apps, and I'm like, I've become so free. I had my boss reach out to me yesterday and say, why aren't you on the meeting today? You know, you're one of the invite, and the meeting's not set up by him, but somebody else, an associate partner in the business. And I said, because I asked him to remove me off it. I've been attending this meeting for the last year, and it has nothing to do with me. There's no point in me being here apart from you get to have a bit of banter or joke with me. But I'm attending and I like what you said there, James. It's kind of come off COVID to a degree that we just lived in meetings. And now I'm starting to, you know, look at all those meetings and go, I'm not contributing. There's no reason for me to be here. And I'm saying no. And then the funny thing is, I'm not getting the clear justification of why I need to be there. And it's forcing people, and it's because it's just a tremendous waste of time and brain cycles. And yeah.
I'm having a similar version of this discussion with with a lot of folks as I've been launching Cloud Lighthouse over the last, couple of months. And it's that when I started to do this, I've been really inspired by Vlad Sarov and Steve Mordu's subscription model they have a Microsoft partner called ForceWorks. And, for those of you who are not, for those who are listening and watching that aren't familiar, basically, they don't charge their customers by the hour, right? They right size the team or what they think the effort is in order to achieve the outcomes that are going to be sought over the next year. And then their client pays a yearly subscription for effectively all you can eat, right? And there are some breaks on this model that they have, but I find that model to be so much friendlier to where we need to be going with the kind of technology that we're working with now, where as the old model of charging by the hour or the day was very oriented around we're doing an implementation of a known quantity application. It's going to have a start and it's going to have an end. And then at the end, we're going to walk away from it. So I've actually been offering my prospective clients, hey, here's 6 months or a year or a quarter of all you can eat of me working with you on these things to pursue these outcomes. And most of the folks that I'm talking with, what they ask is, well, I know it's a worse value to me to just have you charge by the hour, but could you charge by the hour anyway? Because that's how our accounting is set up. And we really need you to charge by the hour. So I've been really astonished by when you offer someone an outcomes-based arrangement that is by almost every measure a better value to them, because if I'm offering that outcomes-based arrangement to you, I'm assuming some of the risk of that outcome not being met or not being met in the amount of time we thought it was going to take. But people just sort of snap back to this. I want something I can quantify. Tasks that are checked off, hours that are worked, meetings that are attended. And I think we're going to have to get over this as, I think, a society and kind of a business society if we're really going to make the most of the technology that the four of us all know and love.
Mm.
I think that the truth and the reality sit somewhere in the middle, because outcomes are great as long as they're guardrail. Like, you want to reach that outcome, and that's your goal, and you don't really focus on the outputs, number of tasks, number of meetings, whatever. But it's so easy to get stuck in indecision hell and cycle. The moment you tell your customer, I'm going to give you all you can eat for a year, it's going to cost you this much, and these are the outcomes that you can achieve, you're putting it all on them, and people just don't want to make that effort. They'd rather just check the task list, because it's not just them.
Yeah.
It's like again, like when you're in school, and you need to convince people that it's really better if we have a lesson outside because the sun is shining and everything's, beautiful. But then, you need to negotiate with your colleagues and then with the teacher and then with everyone else. And then now you grow up and you need to negotiate the same thing. You're like, guys, come outside. It's sunny and nice. And they're like, oh man, but I need to convince, the Power Platform practice and the data practice as well. Can you just charge me by the hour?
Yeah, procurement in organizations really, of course, feel more comfortable with that hourly procurement model. And it's a reality, right, that budgets have to be assigned to things. And so that really conflicts with the idea of agile, like an agile philosophy of this thing is important to us and we're going to continue to work on it until we feel it's good enough. The good enough has to have some kind of financial bounds around it or understanding. And so you kind of have to still then understand the general bounds of the thing so that, somebody in finance doesn't feel like there's an open-ended, check here to be leveraged. It's tough. And I think trying to strike that balance is important, right? The idea that bodies and bodies times number of hours is not a good way to measure, the capacity, but measuring the outputs, whether it's story points or some method of measuring the unit of productivity. I think it's really important, but it's amazing how many organizations still really struggle with embracing that idea of measuring productivity rather than measuring the capacity that they're procuring.
Productivity is notoriously difficult to measure, right, across an organization or across an economy. And even the very idea of, I've been thinking about productivity a lot lately because I think that AI presents society with a really unique opportunity to move the needle on what really has been lagging and shrinking productivity growth across most of at least the Western world over the last couple of years. So this is a really interesting question, but the problem is that nobody really has a terribly good way to measure productivity when you're not producing objects, right? So as we've transitioned, as economies have transitioned to being more service-based, and therefore more of the people working in those economies and the firms in those economies have transitioned to being more service-based, at some point along the line, we simply ascribed the hour, or in Britain, British Microsoft partners are much more into selling, like having a day rate than an hourly rate. So there's a little bit of variation, but at some point along the line, we ascribed filling an hour with like being preoccupied with something, regardless of whether it's a pointless meeting, right? That's like, have I filled this hour with busyness? That must mean I have been productive.
Especially if you get to like check it off, right? Exactly. I like something you said, Mark, about that dopamine hit your zero inbox gave you. And how true is that, right? Like checking off tasks, sending out these many emails. Like it's really hard to fall in love with a problem.
Yeah.
Where it may take you several days and weeks to actually understand the problem and like dig deeper, and people don't want to talk to you. And instead, what's the dopamine hit when you just go in with like this new emerging tech presentation? And I know I've been working at Microsoft. I worked at Microsoft for almost 3 years being responsible of emerging tech. My entire job was dopamine hits. I would just go there and show them like I fully drank the Microsoft Kool-Aid. It was great. Outcomes? Well, not really my job. Someone else had to be in love with the problem.
So one of my favorite moments, sorry, just as an aside, but one of my very favorite moments listening to, a Microsoft person share the story of their particular technology was actually Anna. And when this happened, it was, I was in the back of the room at this session that Anna was giving at a conference, and I was holding, thank you, Apple. And I was holding our baby while Anna was up presenting. And at the time Anna was doing most of her work with RPA. And I guarantee it's the only time that anyone has ever seen someone from Microsoft get up in front of a room and say, the most important thing you need to know about the technology I'm going to tell you about is that you should use it as infrequently as possible. So I don't know if that was like a reverse dopamine hit, but it was a great dopamine hit for me. Like, Microsoft is telling me to use their stuff less. That's interesting, but so correct.
I mean, not their stuff, that particular product.
That was back in the era, right, when people were saying, and this actually gets to falling in love with the solution, not the problem, right? People circa, this was 2021, 2022. I was getting a lot of these calls saying, hey, I've got these folks and they want to talk with you. They want to lead with RPA. And anytime I heard the phrase, I want to lead with RPA, I would say, well, yeah, I mean, that's crazy, right? Who says I want to lead with the most fragile and expensive integration option available to me? But that really, I think that was a time for a couple of years when we were super obsessed with this idea that we can just automate the thing using this one technology that we've all gotten super into, even though it's a complete misapplication of I got to turn that feature off. It's a complete misapplication of the technology itself.
Well, I think, when you, depending on who is standing in front of the client in that scenario where they say, hey, I want to build this thing, you're almost predetermining what the solution is going to look like, because that individual, from their perspective, is going to build the .NET solution or the dynamic solution or Power Platform and so forth, rather than taking a step back and looking at the outcomes or the objectives first, and then figuring out what the right solution should look like. And that's important. And of course, I think it's a challenge at times in the Microsoft ecosystem, being introduced to a client by a Microsoft person, and they have their own motivations for what that solution needs to be. And so it is a challenge to then kind of force that, step back to happen, to have a real conversation with the client.
This is a huge problem, I think, particularly in the partner ecosystem. And it's that, as years ago, when these solutions were all pretty well isolated, right? You could have, I was going to bring you a problem when now my problem is that I need to automate my marketing, or my problem is that I need to improve the reliability of my supply chain. You could pretty well say, oh, well, I think the answer to your problem is dynamics for supply chain, or I think the answer to your problem is dynamics for marketing. But now, so the point, though, is that those solutions could be implemented largely in isolation of other solutions. So we have this entire ecosystem now of partners, right, that are organized around little P&Ls, little profit and loss centers, where if you're talking to the guy that owns the data platform P&L, guaranteed the solution to your problem, I haven't heard the problem yet, but I guarantee it's that you have a data platform problem. And the same with Power Platform, the same with Dynamics, the same with Azure Infrastructure. So if we're going to get past this, if we're going to fall in love with the problem rather than the solution, one of the things that we have to do is we have to change the incentive structure and the organizational structure within these firms that incentivize obsession with the solution rather than with the problem.
I would like to pick up on something that James talked about last time that we were on the show, and that was the awkwardness of the location of the Power Platform, as in where it sits inside an organization. Does it sit inside IT? And I just want to, because what that's left me thinking about is, I use a term when talking with customers that it shouldn't sit inside IT. It should, as in whatever part of your org you create around this, it should be adjacent to IT. They've got to have tentacles into IT because of the tenant, the access, the governance layer is an IT construct, but it should sit adjacent. My question to everybody is, where should it sit? And let's just size things. Where should it sit in an organization that, let's say, are more around the 5,000 to plus sizing of use of the Power Platform? So I'm not talking about small or even real mid, but larger organizations. Where should it sit? How would you advise an organization if they were like, particularly in the scenario that, they had acquired their licenses, that it hasn't seemed to have landed. They haven't seemed to have scaled. They're told about software economics and the ability to grow. You built your first app, that would cover the license. Now the 10,000th app, of course, is now just a fraction of a percentage of that original license. If you're going to advise a customer on setting their organization, forget about the tech piece up, how do you advise them?
I have strong opinions, and therefore I'm not going to go first. So, Anna, James, there you go.
I'll go first just to kind of maybe follow up on that question, Mark, because you kind of, I think, hinted at part of the problem and maybe solution. These large organizations, right, that you're talking about, they grew to become large organizations around a very well-defined structure. And that those structures have their areas of responsibility, and it's very clear in a very traditional IT organizational structure. And so you don't, in a typical organizational structure, have a natural home for Power Platform, or, we talk about a Power Platform Center of Excellence. If that's the direction that you're going to try to build that single organization, it doesn't naturally fit. I'll come back to my thoughts on answering, but I'm going to stop talking and hand it over to Anna or Andrew to pick that up.
Anna.
Oh man, where does Power Platform sit in a large organization? Well, frankly, I think it should sit with IT. But it's not, it's like the ugly sick cousin, and IT doesn't want it because it's like toys for children. And maybe it used to be, but right now it's pretty damn complex, and I think they're a bit lazy as well. They don't really want to.
Not even James could build an app. Like he tried. It was too complex
honestly,
for James.
It's like, it's not that easy.
Okay.
I like to tell my folks in my organization that I am at a junior Power Platform developer level. I haven't advanced further, but I achieved that grade of efficiency.
Right, but I do believe it should have an IT overlord who is there, and DevOps and all of the things together, like on their big dashboards with, I don't know, Datadog or whatever they're using, where they're monitoring where data goes and, how it goes and what sort of processes are up and what's down, et cetera, et cetera. I do think that it should probably find a little bun bet in the IT department. But maybe I'm wrong.
I'm going to chime in here and say that I 100% agree with Anna. I unequivocally think that Power Platform belongs in IT. However, right? Almost
we've never talked about this, by the way.
We've never discussed this topic. We've never discussed this topic. But here's what I think. Here's what I think the rub is. Most IT organizations are not set up either from a cultural perspective, an organizational perspective, or from a leadership perspective to make the most of, and it's not just Power Platform. I don't think that most IT organizations are set up to make the most of Fabric or the data platform or artificial intelligence even, right? So the answer isn't let's pull Power Platform out of IT because IT is not an effective steward of it. It's let's transform the way IT is done so that IT can be a phenomenal deliverer and enabler of this new technology that we have access to. It's not Power Platform that needs to move, it's IT that needs to change. And the change is that IT organizations need to go from thinking of themselves as superintendents of utility companies whose job it is to keep the lights on and the phones ringing and the email sending to really being strategic leaders of and enablers of the business. That's the change that needs to happen here.
That change, though, is very complicated, right? Because companies are very comfortable with what they have, and this the philosophy that IT is just the stewards of the platforms, of the infrastructure, of security, and so forth, of licensing, and that's their entire scope, is what they're kind of comfortable with. And the idea of building applications, building software, building products is not traditionally with them. It's with some other part of the organization, which is why I guess I would challenge whether it's possible for IT to fully embrace the idea of being the enablers of the building of software using technologies like this.
That's fair.
I like it because when I heard Anna and Andrew's comments, I was like, woohoo, we've got a disagreement. and the fundamental reason is that I don't believe engineers are wired to think about innovation for people. They are much more if then, yes, no, binary in decisioning. Are we going to lock it down? Are we going to make it secure? Are we going to have support tickets? Once again, it's all around control, not how do we solve business challenges? And I have never seen in an IT organization that have a hat unless they've got a really creative CTO or CIO that go, you know what, we're here to empower the organization like never before. Most are all around governance, control. And this is why I've voiced so many opinions around the confusion around the COE starter kit and the concept of a COE is because it's all around control and lockdown and secure. Like, it's not about innovation. And so where you want this thing to grow and empower and enable people, and I don't believe I'll change my opinion until I see inside every IT team a full design department that focus on user experience and things like all that fluffy stuff that they go, we do. That's until you address that and create for people.
Make a proposal and get to a person who's actually gonna run the numbers and what do they exclude out of your proposal in order to cut costs? UX, user research, user design, right?
Change management.
So I'm going to say something potentially incendiary here. Maybe the organizational change isn't that we need to move Power Platform and some of these innovation-centric technologies out of IT. Maybe it's that we need to move governance and security out of IT and into the facilities management group, right? Because like as our buildings have become virtual, so too maybe is the way we used to think about our buildings, right? Like there's a difference between achieving an acceptable level of security and governance versus having a forward-looking strategy that is going to grow the business, that is going to return investment to the business, that is going to modernize the business, and that's going to make the business more productive, or whatever those drivers are. Though I agree those aren't the same function, but IT needs to move in the direction of the latter.
I'll add to this commentary because I think there is a shift happening. Think about, the idea of traditionally infrastructure-focused people writing infrastructure as code, right? Several years ago, that wouldn't have been considered a thing that an infrastructure engineer would do. Now they're writing code to automate the deployment. And then similarly, on the other side of the house, if there's two sides of the house, the application developers, writing the software code for their solution are deploying infrastructure and cloud services through that CI/CD pipeline. So everybody's knowledge of each other or their worlds are slowly blending together. And the more that happens, I think there's an opportunity to kind of reshape what IT should be in the future. And who knows when OpenAI fully is embraced in the enterprise space, what that will mean for the future of these IT organizations.
And Mark, you told us
one more.
You told us, okay, no, it does not belong in IT, but you did not tell us where we should put Power Platform. You just hated on our idea.
I love it. I don't actually have the answer yet. Apart from saying, I think it's adjacent to IT, that IT should much more be around keeping the lights on, licensing, providing the infrastructure, but I think the innovation on infrastructure needs to happen outside of IT. But unfortunately, because of the history of IT, when the CX level looks in the organization, they go, hey, this is software or this is IT infrastructure, bang, it automatically goes to that department. And I think it needs to sit, and we need to have a department of innovation inside business.
I'll share my answer because I didn't share it earlier on. Until an organization is able to reimagine how innovation is delivered, when we've attempted to, in smaller organizations, you can put a Power Platform COE team in place, and if the organization is small enough, they're going to be responsible for both the application development type work as well as the infrastructure and governance. But in large enterprises, we found it necessary to really split the COE into two components that kind of complement each other, where the governance, information rights management and so forth, license distribution is managed out of the traditional IT organization, but there's a complementary part of the enablement that is happening in a line of business type organization where they're really driving the use and the value that's been delivered from the platform.
I love it.
Thank you, everybody. We are well over time on this episode at 45 minutes in. And Andrew, I know how you like to keep me to 30 minutes. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. We will see you all next time.
Hey, thanks for listening. I'm your host, Business Application MVP Mark Smith, otherwise known as the NZ365 Guy. If there's a guest you'd like to see on the show, please message me on LinkedIn. If you want to be a supporter of the show, please check out buymeacoffee.com/NZ365 Guy. Stay safe out there and shoot for the stars.